Hello, everyone. Good morning to all our webinar participants. I presume, I strongly believe everyone is passionate about entrepreneurship. And what better platform than this one where we have uh, multiple champions of entrepreneurship in Sri Lanka. Why are we talking about entrepreneurship today? Globally, the Entrepreneurial Week is celebrated every year in November, and Sri Lanka joined the Global Entrepreneurship Network a few years ago under the leadership of Suresh Dimal, who is also one of our panelists. And the week comprised of a collection of what we decided is to brainstorm on the value of entrepreneurship, the challenges of entrepreneurship, and also celebrate entrepreneurship in Sri Lanka. We have brought in a panel of experts. Some of them are entrepreneurs, some of them are champions of entrepreneurs to talk about how to navigate during the pandemic. As we know, the world is suffering from a severe pandemic. Entrepreneurs have to not only survive but also succeed. So we will discuss some key elements towards that success. And today we have brought in the directors of Global Entrepreneurship Network Sri Lanka, who who will during their presentation will bring in some case studies where relevant, and also global best practices in how to foster entrepreneurship and how entrepreneurs can survive during this pandemic. How we will proceed in this webinar is that I'll invite each of the panelists to make their own observations on a chosen topic, and then we will ask some questions subsequently. And if possible, we'll see whether we have time to take some questions from the audience and maybe make it more interactive. So I'd like to start today's session on this entrepreneurship with inviting Randula De Silva to talk on energizing the, I think, during times of pandemic is critical. Over to you, Randula.
Thank you, Nista. It's an absolute pleasure to be here on a panel hosted by Nista and with my peer panelists representing the Global Entrepreneurship Network in Sri Lanka. So very happy to be here. Jumping right into the topic, I would not only focus on the startup ecosystem, but collaborative ecosystems as a whole. But of course, I'll derive a lot of examples from the startup ecosystem, especially encounters that we experienced during the pandemic. So for many years, I've been really connecting organizations and people to strategic partners. And what I encounter time and again is that problems are interconnected, and it needs systemic approaches to solving these issues, which needs to happen really through collaboration. So if we define an ecosystem, it's an interconnected network, right, of organizations, principles, procedures that who are striving towards the same goal, or if not overlapping goals, to achieve something that is wide and common. And that essentially is what an ecosystem is. And the nature of this is in itself is collaborative. It needs to be collaborative in order to sustain. So if we take a look at the status quo of collaboration, it's really connecting and expanding your activities through the obvious partners. The future core, though, the breakthrough really is looking at a systemic change to amplify these collaborations with non-obvious partners. And I think Accenture defines this as a company's competitiveness network, and Deloitte even takes it a step further by calling it value webs. And this is really where we are at, and where we really need to amplify, because we are thriving in a world where sports apparel companies are delivering health outcomes, where caremakers are now delivering mobility. And the pandemic really brought about a very apparent space where companies and people and projects need to know more than their own periphery. And that's not possible for anybody to play God, really, right? So this is why it's essential to combine competencies, capacities of various players in a system to amplify your services, amplify your knowledge to the end user or to the people who are benefiting at the end. And that's what collaboration really brings forth. And this could apply for anybody, to startups, to SMEs, to sectoral verticals, be it transport, mobility, agriculture, or whatever it is. It basically is to push ourselves to go beyond our silos and to merge these lines of separations and define a new paradigm for industries to really work together. And what does collaboration really hold? It can mean many things. It can be pooling resources and reducing costs. And interestingly, the Good Market Network introduced a very innovative collaborative platform online during the pandemic this year, where they opened a platform that could share resources and ask for needs from each other. But of course, in the world, you get companies doing this for a few years now. If you take a look at Toyota's and Suzuki's collaboration, where two of the largest technology companies that ties up to draw on each other's expertise to develop next generation of vehicles. So pooling resources and reducing costs can be a large benefit that can be derived through collaborative activities. And also, customers are more sophisticated now. They're asking for much more complete, comprehensive solutions, be it from a company, be it from a sector, or be it from an NGO itself. And this, I think, can be addressed very smartly through collaborative activities. And I have a very interesting example that came out of the Hatch mentorship program that we conducted during the pandemic this year, where Pay Media and a new startup called Elysian Crest came together to know each other through the mentorship program. And because of that, they're actually exploring a neobanking solution together to disrupt the fintech ecosystem in Sri Lanka. So Elysian Crest was a software developing company who were looking at the neobanking activities, and Pay Media is a large player, experienced player in the fintech ecosystem. And these companies meeting together help them expand on their sectoral knowledge and really create something much larger than themselves for the Sri Lankan market, which is a future of neobanking. So these kind of collaborations are possible if we are willing to share our knowledge, go beyond the boundaries of responsibility and peripheries of our own initiatives and of our own companies, and to be open enough to blur those lines when they need to be merged. And I mean, there's a lot of questions around intellectual property and how these things can be jointly developed. And those are the topics of today for us to really grow into a much more collaborative future. So these are a few examples that I can draw from the very recent experiences that I have encountered firsthand. And one more thing is collaboration is also not just between entities, but it's also drawing from the wisdom of the crowds. So Lego does this very interestingly, where they work through an ideas portal to get their fans and users to submit new ideas for toys. So this is what open innovation is, right? And Unilever does it worldwide. Nestle is ready to do it here in Sri Lanka now. So these are all verticals or approaches to how each company can be collaborative in their own comfort zones, and even to go beyond comfort zones. So what drives the essence of it is really connectivity at all levels in and across all directions, not just a value chain connection, but really a web. So that in a nutshell is what collaboration is to me, and what I like to uphold.
Thanks. Thank you very much, Randula, for that insights on the collaboration. Um, Just before I move on to the next expert, I just want to highlight that this year's theme of Global Entrepreneurship Week, there are four themes this year. One is on ecosystems, which I think talk about collaborating, education, inclusion, and policy. So we will, during this discussion, we'll cover some of the themes of this year's Entrepreneurship Week. And I'd like to invite Chandula Vikrama to talk about financing and investing in entrepreneurship. I think financing is a key element. And then, of course, there are lots of angel investors now promoting your startup. So, Chandula, over to you.
Thank you, Nishta, very much. It's delighted to be in this panel. Just to bring the perspective of the financing and the investing, I just want to, before that, tell the three stages and the stages of the entrepreneurs, because that's very important with regard to the investing and financing. Like you find the first stage, I would call the E, three E's and three A's. The E is the emergence of the entrepreneur. And then the next is the exploration by the entrepreneur and the expansion of the enterprise. So these three stages, the emergence of the entrepreneur, when the entrepreneur emerge as a startup, maybe idea, and that's the very first stage. And that stage you need so much of support, probably incubation of the entrepreneur, enterprise, and different kinds of support mechanism is needed at the emergence of the entrepreneur, when he emerged initially. Then once he emerged, then he began to explore the possibilities of his entrepreneur idea and the innovation, the creativity, all that takes place in the second stage. And on the final stage is the expansion, which is growth stage, which is really going into the commercialization of the enterprise. Now, in all these stages, what I call the three E's need three A's, triple A. What I call the availability, the accessibility, and affordability. Now, the availabilities in all these three stages, I would say there is the diverse kind of availabilities that is needed for these entrepreneurs in all these stages. The first is, when you're talking about access to investment and access to finance, at the early stage, at the incubation stage, you need some sort of a different support, like probably the grants or the seed grant to commence the seed capital to commence the business. The next stage is, I would say, the availability of the accessibility or the availability of the private equity to small and medium level entrepreneurs. Now, this is a very important. This takes place in many other countries in the world, but in Sri Lanka, we don't have that kind of availability of the private equity to micro, small, and medium level entrepreneurs. The next availability should be on the area of the convertible debt. Where the debt is given on a responsible way, and then it is possibility of converting that debt into equity over a period of time. Then finally is the responsible debt, which is when you go into expansion, in this country we have a high price debt, which is not affordable to the entrepreneur. So what I say, the availability is important. Then the next step is the accessibility. Now, most of the entrepreneurs, as I say, in these three stages, the emergence stages, exploration stage, and the expansion stage, need this diversity of the financial services, including investment and debt. Now, these investments and debts have to be really provided in the different stages and the ages of these entrepreneurs, which I mentioned of the three E's: the emergence, the exploration, and the expansion. Now, there is a mixture of things that has to be produced to making sure all these entrepreneurs, whatever the state they are in, whether they are in the emergence stage, exploration stage, or expansion stage, they need to have the accessibility of these seed grants, private equity, convertible debt, and the responsible debt. Now, this is something which is available in the developed countries where the entrepreneurship is blossoming. USA, Europe, and all. Unfortunately, in our country, we only have the debt and money lending only. So we need to really develop the accessibility, we're making availability of the seed grants for seed capital, private equity for micro, small, and medium level entrepreneurs, and the responsible debt coming from credit guarantee mechanism and things like that, and then convertible debt. Now, all these four areas of the availability of the investments and financial services should be affordable, available, accessible, and affordable. Now, in our country, in Sri Lanka particularly, we find the financial services are not affordable. If you look at the interest rates, particularly for the micro, small, and medium level, it is ranging from, I would say, probably 18% to 75%, which is beyond the affordability. So that is where we need to have the affordability of providing the seed grants, affordability of accessibility, the affordability of the private equity. Now, private equity is only available beyond certain level, even the angel investment taking place is a little bit higher. But to micro, small, and medium level, you need to have the private equity. And that is where we have pioneered initiative Lanka Impact Investing, which I found. Pioneered initiative called Power, creating a private equity where we create opportunity private equity, micro, small, and medium level entrepreneurs. Then the other thing is the responsible debt. We don't have responsible debt category and also the convertible debt. Now, if we can match our E's with A's, then I think we can have something really dynamic, what we call the dynamism of the entrepreneurship ecosystem in this country. In the ecosystem, you find the players in diverse shapes and sizes. In all these players, that what is desirable, what is possible should be available through matching this through A's and E's, and then we can create a dynamic and a sustainable entrepreneur ecosystem that can blossom into a commercial, strong economy of this country. Thank you.
Thank you, Chandula. Excellent. I think it's a good start for discuss some of the challenges. I'd like to invite Fayaz Huda to talk. Fayaz, you're there, right? Okay, to talk on the significance of IT and digitalization. I think that's another important topic, particularly in the startup landscape, as well as for other companies as well in general. Fayaz, you'd like to make your own comments on this?
Thank you, Minister. Am I audible?
Yes.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. Great to be on this panel with my team from Global Entrepreneurship Network, and delighted about the work that we are doing. Hopefully, we'll do more to help our entrepreneurs succeed. My topic today was to talk about the significance of IT and digitalization in this day and age. I think that topic needs not much emphasis given the times that we are in. I'd like to start with a quote from Isaac Asimov, who said that our statesmen, our businessmen, and our everyman must think like a science fiction, or every man must take on a science fiction way of thinking. Isaac Asimov, Robert Heinlein, and Sir Arthur C. Clarke were considered top 3 science fiction or scientists who were talking about space exploration and so on and so forth way back in the 1950s. Why do I say this? Because the times that we are living in today, to some of us, would seem like science fiction, right? I'm also everybody's trying to grapple with the kind of unprecedented challenges that they have been suddenly made to face. But I would like to bring in a thought that disruption has only accelerated, but the way it was being disrupted had already started much before. Tourism industry in Sri Lanka is having a lot of challenges, right? As we know, And globally, this is the case. But I'd come to this example leading on from this. Now, if you look at when computers were first came in, the cost of the computer was astronomical, and it was not much more than a glorified calculator, right? And many companies who were in the calculator business used to dismiss the computer. This is not going to be of much value. Same was with the digital camera. Same was with even the touch screens. So on and so forth. Lots of companies who had the patents, who had the capabilities to disrupt their own market, did not do so. So somebody else did. Of course, different dynamics, things accelerate or decelerate based on something, but the disruption is consistent. That's, I think, one message that I want to raise with you. Tourism is being disrupted because of the pandemic, because of what it was. But if you look at space tourism, cost of somebody going to space was about $20 million for a ticket. Right? I think that's what the Canonical Corporation owner who bought Ubuntu to the world spent. The famous Japanese e-commerce magnate spent to go to space about $20 million for a ticket. But today we have companies like Blue Origin, SpaceX, Virgin Galactic, and so on, who would give it to you at about $250,000 a ticket. Still very, very expensive. But if you see, it's an order of magnitude cheaper. And this is how disruption is happening only from a few decades to now. And $250,000, although it's expensive when you convert in Sri Lanka, it's almost 50 million rupees. But this is kind of the price that somebody in the yacht charter, experienced traveler would spend for a week, right? So it's already in that range. So you can just imagine an expensive car in Sri Lanka, like a Land Cruiser or a Range Rover, so on, is in the same kind of price range, right? So this disruption is kind of rather rapid, and when it happens, so I think what I'm trying to emphasize is like what Isaac Asimov said. We need to build this mindset of thinking in a different way. All right. So that, I think, is the crucial point. In the future, and I think I'll talk a little bit in these comments. I'll talk about the future because I think my colleagues are more going to talk a lot more on a lot of other things that are relevant here. Already we have a robot who is a citizen of the world, right? A financial company, which is the largest maybe financial services provider, who is not a bank, right? Fastest cars that is built by countries that are very small populations, very this thing, including Sri Lanka. We have a very fast car that is being built here. So I think the thing is, the way in which this is getting disrupted is very significant, and a lot of us are having problems. We will find difficulty finding people to help us at home and do cook and clean and so on. Already there are tools that is available and within accessible price ranges for right now at the beginning, at the top end of the market. Robots and so on that is already available commercially. The reason why I'm saying this is we need to identify how this disruption trend works, right? It drops in order of magnitude every few years, and at that point we are already too late. Right. So the reason why I'm saying this is, if we get into this mindset, then we can see the trend, get in early, make small bets, or make certain inroads, whether in terms of technology, whether in terms of aligning with certain companies, and so on, so that we can then profit significantly when it hits that mass market. So I think in every single space, you have this opportunity, whether it's healthcare, whether it's transportation, whatever that you this thing. So and we have in Sri Lanka companies, organizations who are providing services in the IT and digitalization space globally to top class customers. Governments, large corporations, we already have in Sri Lanka. So that part of it is there. I think we, like Chandula mentioned very clearly about the challenges in finance. Similar things exist in other areas about adoption of technology from other spaces. I think this mindset change is required, so that we can grow faster. And this is only going to accelerate. The 5 nanometer 30 billion transistor chip is already in the market, right? Significant because this is considered, I mean, the human brain is considered to have 3 billion neurons, 30 billion neurons. So we are getting into that whole digital age, and that the significance of IT and digitalization is going to only accelerate. And we need to be quite open to change what we were doing before, the way that we were doing it, but look at the things that we have at hand to extract value from what we have now, and also align ourselves for the future. I'd like to finish my opening remarks with a quote from Ted Levitt, who says that the future belongs to people who see possibilities before they become obvious. Just like how you would invest in the stock market, we need to be able to do this before it's obvious, so that we are ahead of the game. Thank you.
Thank you, Fayaz. Thank you very much. I'd like to invite Dr. Nirmal De Silva into the panel as well. Thank you very much for joining us despite your busy schedule. Thank you. And I'd just like to move on to Nirmal. Are you free? Are you willing to talk, make your presentation now?
Yes, Nista.
Right.
Good morning, everyone, and Aibon.
Yes. So Nirmal will talk about entrepreneurial resilience. I think that is, given the COVID situation, pandemic situation or not, I think entrepreneurial resilience is very critical. And I'm sure Nirmal will be able to share some insights.
Yeah, Nista. So basically, I think first and foremost, thank you for everyone who organized this particular webinar and giving me the opportunity to speak a few words on as you very rightly said, a bit of interesting topic on entrepreneurial resilience. So basically, what we need to understand is not only during the COVID-19 pandemic, but we also need to look at in any other crisis situation. One of the main challenges for entrepreneurs, SMEs, startups, or even C-level professionals is on how to navigate during tough times. What are some of the decisions that they need to take, the hard decisions, and how are they going to mobilize the resources that they have towards a new vision and overcoming those challenges effectively. So I think COVID-19 is also no different. From Sri Lankan perspective, we are now witnessing and experiencing the second wave of the pandemic. So during the first lockdown period, I believe it brought in enormous challenges, especially for the SME sector. But again, across the board, we saw a huge economic and a health impact. But one of the areas that we often tend to forget is the psychological impact of COVID-19 and similar pandemics. Now, there is this notion that any entrepreneur can work best, can find solutions best when they have a much more clearer mind and when they are not too worried about things beyond their control. And more often than not, we see entrepreneurs really suffering with high levels of stress, anxiety, frustration as a result of the economic impact of COVID-19. So the word resilience becomes even more important now. So how do you build resilience? And for the benefit of viewers of this webinar, I believe there are a few areas in which entrepreneurs need to be resilient. One is what I call the leadership resilience. And this is where you need to walk the talk. You can't go ahead with what worked best for you in the past. You need to mobilize your teams, resources differently. Even simple things like working from home, whilst you might have invested in working from home tools, technology, you need to now start putting into practice. You need to let go of having this notion that leadership is all about having people around the boardroom or during the office hours, etc. And we see that in a lot of Sri Lankan companies. So you need to really challenge the way of how work is done. As long as you have teams who understand the vision, as long as they understand what their job role is, you need to start empowering them. And that requires resilience. It requires resilience during tough times. When the going gets good, it's very easy to forget about this. You can even ignore some of these aspects. So the first part is leadership resilience. The second part is organizational resilience, where you, as an entrepreneur or a small business owner, you need to not only look at your own journey, your own focus areas, but you need to get the organization adaptable. These days, it's about survival of the most adaptable and not necessarily survival of the fittest, as it used to be. So organizational resilience comes from realigning your organizational structure, look at flexible work models, look at performance-based compensation plans or payment plans, then looking at areas like hiring the right staff, multi-skilling them, and more importantly, redefining your business model, because what worked well before may not be useful in the new normal, because the challenges and opportunities are going to be much different. And this is where, even if you want to pivot your organization with what you have been doing, you need to have organizational resilience in order to do that. The third element is decision-making resilience. More often than not, the smartest entrepreneurs and the people who can overcome any crisis are people who can take swift decisions, who can evaluate all alternatives quickly and come up with the best possible solution or the best possible alternative solution. And for that, also you need resilience, where you need to start challenging conventional norms, move out from your comfort zone, starting to listen to various people, various stakeholders when taking decisions. And that is very important, because even if you have to introduce a new performance-based payment system or compensation plan to staff, as opposed to the fixed salary scenario, that requires some hard decisions to be made. And how do you do that? How do you communicate staff? How do you remobilize them? How do you inspire them? Requires decision-making resilience. Last but not the least, I think we also need to have market resilience. And what I mean by market resilience is that we need to speak with other players in the market, even though they might be competitors. We need to look at ways of collaborating. Collaboration is the only way forward, especially during a time of a pandemic of this nature. We can't be very silo-based or myopic in thinking. We need to see on how best we can leverage, how best we can use each other's strengths to the benefit, and how we can increase the share of the pie. Because demand is shrinking, and we need to find new ways of how we can captivate our customers and provide them solutions to their ever-changing needs as a result of the pandemic or any crisis situation. So instead, to start off, what I would like to say is that resilience is very important. You and I, when we look at things and how we think and act, might be different, but one common ground is that Sri Lanka is a nation that we've gone through a lot. We've been a battered and bruised nation, 30 plus years of war, Easter Sunday attacks, now 2 waves of the pandemic. One of the things that have taken us ahead amidst our regional peers is that we are a resilient nation, but that doesn't mean that we can take things for granted. And we definitely need to start making changes at an individual level, a corporate level, and at an industry level. We can't be thinking that the state can manage everything and they will have a one-size-fits-all approach. And for me, that's what matters the most when it comes to resilience, the mindset over skill set.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Nirmal. I think you led us to the next speaker and the topic on crisis management. It will be Talal Rafi, who will, I think, go from where Nirmal stopped in terms of resilience, and in the absence of resilience, then I'm sure you're managing a crisis. So maybe Taral can shed some insights. Thank you, Taral.
Thank you, Nista, for having me. I'll speak about crisis management. So we'll jump off from where Nirma left. So what is crisis management? Crisis management is a process where you are putting in things to face uninterrupted, events that are interrupting the process and things that are unexpected and negative, this thing. So a lot of people think that crisis management is simply about finding answers, but crisis management is about putting in a process to make put the company in the best possible position to find the answers in the fastest possible way. So that is crisis management. And how prepared are we when it comes to crisis management? I would say even looking at the S&P 500 companies, a study by Ernst & Young shows that 79% of the board directors think that their own companies are not prepared for a crisis. So that's how unprepared we are. I mean, these are like crises for political upheavals or for an oil company like an oil spill. But on a scale like this, a pandemic and this scale, I mean, these companies are not prepared. And when we talk about SMEs, we're even more unprepared. So some of the areas, let's just focus on the current COVID. So what are the areas, like the main areas which affect the companies? I would say cash flow is number one. And to solve that, Chandula spoke about it, but I would say not just about speaking to investors and banks, we can even speak to our suppliers, distributors, and look into the gaps, try to fill them. This would be one area. And the other one is disrupted supply chains. As we know, we live in a globalized world where we could be getting supplies from China and we're exporting to the US. So we have to take everything into consideration. And the third thing is, and the most important thing is health and safety. Most of our workers have to work from home. There are travel restrictions. So how do we cope with all this? And leading a team while they're remote working is quite tough. Then, so how can we deal with this? Some of the practical steps. First and foremost, the most important thing for a company when faced with a crisis of this magnitude would be to put in a team, a cross-functional team from every department, HR, finance, marketing team, and the CEO has to be in it. And we need to give this team the authority. And it has to be able to take decisions very fast. Most of the time we have a team, which is mostly an advisory thing, then they have to go to the CEO, and the CEO sometimes has to get approval from the board. So this team has to be given the authority to make decisions fast. This would be the first and most important step when it comes to crisis management. And the second thing is, once this team is there, they have to assess where are things going wrong, what can we do, and where are we most exposed to. It can be the supply chain, it can be, the patient's part of it, how the team is going to be led in the next few weeks, these areas. So this team has to put in a plan which can take the company forward. And the third thing would be crisis planning. So when I talk about crisis planning, most companies, they would make a decision exactly based on the facts right now. I would say while in the middle of a crisis, you have to also think about what is going to happen next week. What could possibly change? For example, we have a lockdown in the Western province, in Colombo, for this week. Maybe next week it will be another part of Sri Lanka where lockdown could come in, or another area of Sri Lanka where the lockdown could be taken out. So these are things we have to, while we are putting a plan based on the current situation on that particular day, we also have to think about the next week, the next month, and possibly even the next year. And the fourth thing, which is very important, is leadership. The leader has to be calm and confident to manage a crisis, because not just the customers. When people talk about leadership, most people think that the customers or the markets are looking at the leader, but it's not the case. I mean, the bankers are looking at the leader, the investors, the distributors, the suppliers, the own employees. So when a leader is not confident, not calm, so this can upset everybody and bring the company down. So, however, it could be a very tough time for an entrepreneur, but he has to show a lot of confidence and calmness. And the other thing is, the fifth point would be, we have to look into collaborating. that is what Global Entrepreneurship Network is about, as Suresh will explain. Collaborating is very important because we may have to put aside our differences, speak to our rivals, possibly like our partners, because whatever crisis we are going through, they're going through the same. And we both can like give and take, help each other out. And before concluding, I would like to leave on a positive note. We shouldn't look at this crisis in a negative way. There are positives, like when you look at the 2008 financial crisis, that gave us Uber, Airbnb, WeWork. It led to a different sort of culture. And I see a lot of positives coming out of the current crisis as well. Like, for example, remote working is coming in. And just a report in Europe came out that once the word flexibility and working from home was put in, it led to a almost tripling of the amount of applications from women. So this is going to allow women empowerment, especially with a much better work-life balance. And another positive would be a global workplace. For example, a company does not necessarily have to hire from the city it's situated in. We can hire any talented worker from around the world now with remote working going on. And at the same time, it allows somebody who is very talented, who lives in Sri Lanka, to work for a European or US company. So these are some of the positives that are coming out with the change of culture. And we still don't know what else can come out. So we'll have to wait and see. But I believe that though it's a struggle, we can get through it with proper resilience, confidence, and proper leadership. And there are positives to take out of this as well. Thank you, Mr.
Okay, thanks, Talal. Thank you very much. Thank you very much for that perspective. I like to tell, I see a couple of questions already shared by participants. I welcome more questions so that we can make it more interactive and perhaps make the best use of this expert panel. So please do share your questions, and time permitting, we'll take some of them. I'd like to invite Suresh Timel, who is actually the brains behind this whole initiative. Suresh, to talk about, I think Talal spoke about collaboration and how GEN, or the Global Entrepreneurship Network, can help, particularly the entrepreneur ecosystem. Suresh, can you sort of share your own perspective about navigating in the pandemic?
Good morning, everybody. Yes, Global Entrepreneurship Week is a celebration of entrepreneurs. Now, 12 years ago, a few countries got together and thought that we needed to have cross-border collaboration and celebration of entrepreneurship. Now, currently, we have about 180 countries involved with about 50,000 participants and maybe 50,000 partners and 10 million participants. Now, the purpose of this is a global entrepreneurial ecosystem. Now, there are many entrepreneurial ecosystems in the world that are working in their own area. I mean, even in Sri Lanka, we have many ecosystems. Now, unless all these ecosystems connect and we are able to share each other's experiences, the progress in entrepreneurship is going to be slow. Now, Sri Lanka has to fast track. Everybody, I think, has to fast track entrepreneurship in order to navigate and survive and succeed through this COVID pandemic. So in order to do that, there are many global resources that are available. Now, when I started my business 40 years ago, we had to go to a trade fair. We had to travel, or read a magazine, and understand what the industry was all about. It was quite costly. Today, I have that information on a smartphone. And a person in Batikalo can access that as well. So today, networking is mandatory in order to keep up with the rest of the world. And we need to keep an eye on what the rest of the world is up to, because we are in a very competitive world. Whether we are talking about food on our table or exports or tourism, we have to compete with other places that are also in the market. Now, saying that, some of the countries like ourselves are lagging behind. We have to first of all admit that we are lagging behind in entrepreneurship, because we expect our government to support us during crisis. We've had many crises, but the recovery was also good, but not good enough. And are we crisis ready? No. So I think this pandemic has brought a realization that we are not in this alone, and we can't expect governments to bail us out. There is no government in the whole world that can bail a country out through a pandemic like this. So what is an entrepreneur's role in this whole exercise, or in coping with this pandemic and seeing success at the end of it? I think that every one of our panelists up to now spoke about collaboration. I think we need to understand collaboration with respect to competition. Now, if we can balance collaboration and competition and work with our competitors at a time like this, I think that's the only way we are going to have sustainable recovery. I think if you browse through the global networks right now, I mean, Global Entrepreneurship Network has a lot of resources and a lot of discussions around the world, policymakers discussing how to cope with this pandemic. And I encourage people to browse through the web and find this information and understand what the rest of the world is going through, because then we can see how we can survive. Because, you know, there are many people studying this problem, trying to forecast what is going to happen. Now, 8 months ago, I remember 7 months ago, the tourism industry, you know, the International Air Transport Association came out and said that tourism was not going to come back for 3 years. However, we were talking about opening our airport, you know, and British Airways closed down, many big airlines grounded, right? But we must be realistic. If an organization like the International Air Transport Association says that tourism is not going to come back for 3 years, then they are serious about it. There is something serious about it. But we need to look at what is happening around the world to realize how we can be more realistic about our response to that. So now I think the SMEs in this country have to, many have to switch or repurpose or upskill, and there's lots of resources around the world. And I encourage people to look at networks, entrepreneurial networks, where there is much information. The Global Entrepreneurship Week has been celebrating a lot of activities around the world, and the Global Entrepreneurship Network will have activities throughout the year, and we can share and collaborate, and that's my start to this, and I would love to answer any questions anybody has. Thank you.
Okay, thanks. Thank you very much, Suresh. My final panelist is, perhaps say the best for the last, is Anushka, Vijay Singh, economist, who will talk on the policy innovations to support entrepreneurship, support the entrepreneurship, which I think Suresh was talking about as well. So let's what would be the right policy, Anushka? I think you're the best person. Please share your insights to that.
Thanks, Nista. Hi, good morning, everyone. It's a real pleasure to be with you this morning and join this session along with my colleagues on Gen Sri Lanka. When you, as we mark Global Entrepreneurship Week 2020, one thing that I find particularly interesting about the Gen network or our entrepreneurship network is that there has always been a pillar of focus on the role of smart policy tools to support entrepreneurship. That's quite unusual for an entrepreneurship network where it tends to be more on the innovation, startups, and so on, and the policy piece tends to get missed because perhaps it's not the end all and be all. But I find that Gen has this focus, and it really then lends itself to showcasing very interesting policy innovations by other countries. They even have an awards and recognition scheme for policy champions in entrepreneurship, which I definitely recommend to all of you interested in this space. You'll see some great examples of governments and policymakers using innovative policy measures to support. Get in where it's necessary, get out where you want to stay away from getting in the way of entrepreneurship. So to Nista's question, there are many things that we could talk about, but given that a lot of it was already covered, I'd like to focus on two very practical areas of policy. The first is on financing. Especially during and in the aftermath of COVID, the focus of policy tools in providing financial support, which are kind of government instigated, government initiated, I think should go beyond the standard tools of concessionary loans. And I think we really need to quickly start looking at more long-term patient financing, but also about financing that helps startups and banks de-risk, tools that help startups and banks de-risk. Better policy tools are those like credit guarantee funds that help reduce the risk of banks in financing entrepreneurs. We know that now the moratorium has been extended many times. Eventually, when a more normal, quote unquote, normal scenario of lending comes back in, we don't want financial institutions to turn away from good ideas, good entrepreneurs, given the stress in the financial sector. So doing whatever it takes to de-risk that by way of, for instance, credit guarantee funds and credit guarantee schemes could go a long way. And we're seeing that sort of, those sort of policy tools being deployed in other countries. Also tools like export credit insurance. I know it sounds like a small, obscure space in the financing area, but I can't stress enough how important export credit insurance is. It essentially de-risks entrepreneurs, exporters who want to export overseas, and it's of particular importance to those who can't bear big shocks. So small entrepreneurs, smaller exporters, especially in a tricky external environment like we are in today, where sometimes payments will get delayed, there could be defaults, you could have sudden lockdowns in the foreign markets, like we're seeing even in the UK right now, which then could severely hurt the small exporter here, where they can't face that kind of shock. Talal talked about managing during a crisis. I think a big source of this instability and crisis comes by way of for smaller and medium exporters during times like this, and the role of export credit insurance to support this is huge. Sri Lanka has an agency for it, but it seems that more of their resources go towards the larger exporters, and I think it's time we change that mix, supporting the smaller exporters to de-risk. Another COVID-related policy measure important for entrepreneurship and the private sector is in how COVID-related relief to businesses is granted. When you look at many countries that have deployed successful COVID relief efforts for business, they have done it quite cohesively and comprehensively, not piecemeal and disconnected. A recommendation I had shared with some folks in government as COVID set in earlier this year was to carve out one pot of money with many windows. So the treasury guarantees for loan moratoriums, central bank refinancing, relief measures for small business, payroll relief, postponed utility payments. So all of these are there, but they're not coming from all over the place with small pots of money. They're coming from one pot, the COVID business relief pot, that is identified and earmarked into one program. but multiple windows. And I think in that way, what we've seen with how it's been done in some other countries is that it becomes better managed, better accountability. It's easier to communicate it to stakeholders and help them understand the relief schemes that are in place. And also by crafting it in this way, one pot with many windows, the possibility of leveraging that one pot of government money to then top it up with other money, let's say by development partners, it makes it much more possible, much more palatable to someone who want to support that. The second policy area that I want to focus on might seem a bit narrow and boring at first, but I guarantee you it's a bit of a hidden gem, and that is public procurement. With the growing recognition that innovation frequently occurs in response to specific demand or specific stimuli, procurement, which is basically the process of obtaining goods and services from a market, is an increasingly common feature of policy support for innovation and entrepreneurship. And I think here I draw from a toolkit that I was part of crafting as a member of the World Economic Forum's Global Future Council on Innovation Ecosystems. It was called Accelerating the Emergence of Innovation Ecosystems Through Procurement. And I will put the link to that toolkit in the chat box. The starting premise of this was the following. Governments spend lots of money a year on procurement using people's money, taxpayers' money, and wouldn't it be fantastic if this public procurement is used to spur innovation in the country, rather than that money simply encouraging more of the same, encouraging mediocrity, encouraging rent seekers, encouraging only larger established firms that are just simply good at bidding for project after project. So how can this taxpayer money be leveraged to spur new products, new processes, innovation, and new firms? And it was interesting when we looked at it, procurement globally represents 12% of global GDP and nearly 30% of total government spending, particularly in developed and emerging markets. And using the quote unquote power of the public purse to drive innovation was actually identified as a key opportunity by the UK-based innovation think tank Nesta a few years ago. But, and we know this from a report by Startup Genome, procurement remains an area in which governments have taken the least action when it comes to supporting innovation. And there are many examples of places that have done a great job of leveraging this public procurement to drive innovation and entrepreneurship. The report features examples from Dubai, Queensland, Boston, Singapore. And it's timely now, particularly as we are in budget week, given that the government has announced much by way of doing things domestically, there is an opportunity to think about how to deploy this public spending differently than we've had before. Unfortunately, also what we realized during this is that many countries, including Sri Lanka, public procurement rules are often startup and innovation unfriendly. So I think this also must be addressed early. My mind goes back to business, a startup, innovative business that I visited a couple of years ago, who manufacture a specialized type of lightning conductors in Sri Lanka, just in the outskirts of Colombo. And high quality, having got all the international certifications and standards compliance. And he even won contracts with foreign companies in Europe. But he was still unable to win a single bid from a Sri Lankan public agency, CEB, telecoms, and all these folks that had put out tenders for lightning conductors. So he was very puzzled. And he said, largely it's to do with the mindset, of course, the risk-wary mindset, but also public procurement rules that are written in a certain way. Interestingly, in budget 2019, some of us managed to convince, including an earmark of 10% of public procurement to be reserved for SMEs and startups. It was a great first step, but it has to be actioned, including rewriting some of these rules so that they are more open to being innovation and entrepreneurship friendly. One thing, of course, that I will call out, and you have to be cautious in this, is to avoid creating tenderpreneurs. where preferential treatment is then misused and misplaced. But there are many systems in place to possibly avoid this so that it can be done right. You have outcome-based, stage procurement, risk-aware procurement, and so on. All of that good stuff is highlighted in the report, and happy to talk about it with anyone who's interested. So let me end there, having focused on these two key practical policy areas that I think governments can focus on right away. One is smarter financing and COVID relief measures that are more holistic and more comprehensive. And secondly, using public money to be more smart money in a way that spurs innovation and new entrepreneurs. So I just thought I'd pick up these two out of many possible policy areas, given the COVID conditions, but also the budget this week. Thank you, Mr.
Yeah, thanks, Anushka, for that excellent articulation. I want to thank all the panelists to really for sticking the time slots in terms of the opening remarks. So I have some questions, but I like to sort of make it interactive. So I'll jump on to the questions from the webinar participants. Maybe Randula can answer this question. The panelists also can contribute. This is from Mr. Leo Fernando. The question is, does the startup ecosystem in Sri Lanka have in place a team responsible to put together all macro ideas, and try to best organize and prioritize some of the knowledge sharing across networks? Andula, is there a way to, can you answer that question?
Sure. Thank you, Nista. I'm happy to take a stab at it, but feel free, anybody in the panel, to take it on afterwards. So to this question, there's no one single team, but there is a web of an ecosystem that works towards amplifying these efforts and to be collaborative as possible. If I just may take a few examples, this also can mean that there can be specific initiatives and time-bound activities that are specifically focusing on vertical-oriented efforts. So if I take an example from the fintech ecosystem, when we kicked off the fintech accelerator as Hatch this year, we formulated a team that comprised, we had CBSL officials, we had the Sri Lanka Fintech Association, we had the entrepreneurs on the ground, we had the private sector banks, as well as a few other enthusiasts who are interested to find out what are the solutions that are coming from bottom up, and also what are the policy alternatives or policy initiatives that can come from regulatory authorities that can really help these on the ground entrepreneurs innovate. So that is an initiative that started, and the snowball effects of it are still in the making. And this is a conversation that really started about 3-4 years ago, innovating the fintech ecosystem in Sri Lanka. And we're seeing the results of it trickle down very slowly and now. And these kind of initiatives in different teams, focusing on different topics and verticals, are multiple in Sri Lanka. It can be sustainable entrepreneurship, it can be organic agriculture, it can be very many different things. And as umbrella bodies who are supporting entrepreneurs across these verticals, you have few initiatives and you have few organizations, initiatives like Spiration coming out of ICTA that are working with idea stage startups across the country, in communities like Yal IT Hub in Jaffna that are working with a lot of on the ground entrepreneurs, and authorities like the Education Authority and Vocational Training Authorities in the Northern Province are bringing together these players. We have ULEAD, we have the LIN network, we have Hatch. So there's very many different bodies that are focusing on their different strengths and different verticals, but are really doing the same work of focusing on idea stage entrepreneurs or SMEs or middle level entrepreneurs and trying to give the best of their knowledge. So Lankan Angel Network, they're really looking at the impact, the investor perspective of it. And we formulate collaborations with them in order to amplify our strengths with theirs. And that's how the HatchX FinTech Accelerator came about as an effort of Hatch and Land. So one team, no, there's multiple teams that can formulate, like I said, collaborative initiatives to address and amplify these effects to be better, and that is happening in different segments and different parts of the country.
Good. Pending someone wants to respond. Anushka, can you tell me, you were part of an administration previously? Is this kind of an exercise possible of someone really leading the team, putting all these ideas together? I know it looks a bit impractical, but I mean, having served the previous administration, do you think is this practical?
I think I'm very much with Randula's point of view. Given the complexity of the entrepreneurship and innovation ecosystem, it necessarily requires a great deal of collaboration. Having said that, one thing that we often notice is that there is a coordination failure. And sometimes that coordination is done by private entities, particularly if it's purely private sector focused. You have entities like Hatch and other networks that coordinate the private part of the ecosystem. Sometimes you get real breakout initiatives that manage to coordinate between private and public, but that doesn't happen often. And certainly within the public sector, coordination failure is always there. So I think there is a role to play, not in terms of any one agency taking the agenda and running with it alone. That baton can't be carried alone, as very much Randula said. However, fixing that coordination failure within government as well as between public and private sector is extremely important in order to amplify what some of the private sector folks are doing. There are a lot of things that get in the way of private initiatives, little policy tweaks, regulatory tweaks that are required, gaps, institutional gaps, and so on, and those can't be addressed by any one entity alone. So what I would say is not necessarily an agency or a team that is exclusively responsible for driving the agenda, but certainly a dedicated group of officials, however loosely formed, who have been tasked with solving the coordination problem, who have been tasked with the mandate of supporting the innovation and entrepreneurship agenda, which serves as a platform for all these entities to come, resolve their issues, and agree on that tries to implement. So that's my view.
Thank you. Thank you. I'll quickly move on to another question from Rakshan Fatima. I think maybe Nirmal can answer this, and perhaps also Suresh, talking about tourism. How or when do you think tourism will come back? But I think the more important question is, how can tourism sector show resilience during the pandemic? Nirmal and Suresh can respond to that.
Thanks, Mr. I'll probably take the first crack at that. Well, I believe, again, it comes to my original point in the first session. The tourism industry will definitely need to change its business model. And far often, I feel that there is a lot of fragmentation within the tourism industry. And if you look at few of the countries which kicked off tourism during the pandemic, like Greece and so forth, there are a lot of things that we can probably learn in terms of how they have ensured that the overall industry comes up with a more strategic and robust action plan. And that requires a multi-stakeholder perspective. And for me, when we look at tourism, we are narrowly defining it with tour operators, hotels, etc. For me, from the duty-free, the porters over there, the taxis, all of that are an integral part of tourism. And that's what we need to be focusing on. Secondly, how do we position ourselves amidst the pandemic? Are we going to position ourselves as a safe destination? Are we going to position ourselves as a value destination, value for money kind of scenario? Or are we going to position ourselves with the traditional way of how we have been doing? So if you want ruins, whether you want adventure tourism, whether you want the traditional brick and mortar tourism. So we'll have to start relooking into that. Last but not the least, on the collaboration side, I feel we need to work with our regional neighbors. We need to see on how we can couple packages and tour offers working with the other countries as well. No more can we operate in a silo level if we are to be resilient. It's easier said than done. I know there is a lot of challenges from a financial perspective, but we need to deal with it and we need to find a way of withering the storm. And I think collaboration is one way of mitigating the risk.
Okay, thank you. Suresh, quick response?
Yeah, Nista, I'll respond about how when tourism is going to come back. Now, I have seen many people saying, you know, like the International Air Transport Association, that it's going to be 3 years. And my feeling is that even when it comes back, it's going to look quite different. Because if we haven't dealt with this virus with vaccinations and so on, which we don't have a guarantee of that yet. So it's very difficult to say that it's even, you know, what kind of tourism is going to be. Sri Lanka is basically a long haul budget destination. And currently budget travelers and long haul travelers are unable to do that, you know, unable to travel. So when travel does come back, what it's going to look like is question, you know, a big question. On the other hand, if we are unable to survive with the resources we have and the capital we have, if we cannot survive a reasonable, now already we've survived 8 months or 7 months. If we are unable to survive in the next month or two, then we have to switch. As entrepreneurs, I think we take a risk, and when we need to know when to switch and do something else that is more sustainable. So if we wait until we run out of all the capital we have, then we are going to be struggling to switch. So I think that that's the challenge people will have now. Yeah. Go ahead, Nista.
Yeah, you can. Yeah, I might rest of the panel if anyone. Yeah. I'd like. Yeah, the rest of the panel can also share some insights if you have.
If I may add something to that about the pivots that Suresh mentioned, right? Especially for the tourism sector. So I'm not talking about a comeback, but I'm talking about surviving in the short run, because it's the sector that has been hit more than once, and more than the pandemic also, because it took a hit last year, it was just picking up, and back to 0.0 or even below now. And through the Good Life Accelerator, or GLX, that I work with, we initiated something called a Crisis Resilience Challenge, and is expanding it further now to help tourism-based companies. It can be innovative most companies or conventional most companies, it does not matter, but who are really having their main lifeline based on the tourism industry to pivot in the short run. What can you do until the sector picks up with the property you have, with the plantations you might have, with the people that you have in hand, in order to not let them go, but to keep them with you and provide for something else in the local market beyond tourism. So a few examples would be one company called JCAP Holdings in Trincomalee that had a very short-term interesting pivot of going into landscape businesses. So they just grew ornamental plants and organic fertilizers to sell to the local farming community. There was another company in Sigiri called Back of Beyond that just expanded their fruit and vegetable crops that they used for their hotels to distribute to urban areas for selling through distribution networks that they got introduced to during the pandemic. So those are very short-term pivots that they did because there was nothing they could do. And they're doing actually very well compared to other companies who just, closed their doors, let their employees go, and really panicked in the short run. So those are just few examples about surviving in the short run for the tourism sector.
Excellent. Thanks, Chandula, for that intervention. Chandula, there are a couple of questions to you, Chandula.
Yes.
Okay. So first question, I think one is about related to the budget, where the government announced setting up a national development banking corporation merging some of the state entities dealing with housing and finance aspect. I don't know whether you're aware about it. That was one question. And then there's another question which I thought was interesting about a planter who had moved on to
Hello?
the planter whose portfolio is about rubber, pepper, and mangoes, and they couldn't perhaps achieve their targets this year. How can he raise some financing for his plantation? Those are the two questions, immediate questions I wanted to answer.
Yeah. The first is, I think it's a very encouraging initiative for government to kind of combine these three banks and set up the National Development Banking Corporation, which is absolutely a very vital and important thing to focus more on the development side of banking, which was lost to the country since NDB and DFCC was more into commercial banking. But I think the fundamental issue that what I have seen in the country is more than this kind of development thing, this SME sector, what is needed is what I call the responsible lending. And that is for that because this sector cannot afford the collateral for their borrowings. So that is why in this country is essential aspect of creating a very strong credit guarantee mechanism. It's absolutely critical for that. And to support the development side of banking, it's because at the micro, small and medium level, it is essential along with this development banking corporation, there has to be a similar engagement through a credit guarantee mechanism to make sure that these people who are at this entrepreneur level are able to access this kind of banking facilities without any collateral. That's a very important thing. Then with regard to the gentleman who wants to this thing, he has to decide on what kind of financial services that he would require. Now, if he's looking for an investor, like equity, then it's a different thing. I mean, there is a possibility if he wants to really get an investor interested in his in a particular farm or the industry, then there is a possibility of number of private sector investors looking at it, and then provided that he comes up with various information available. Then going to if he's already obtained facilities from the bank, then there is a possible moratorium is already extended for another 6 months, which he can really, depend on. But if he wants to, he has to decide what way that he wanted the financing, whether to expand, whether to survive, or whatever the means that financial, particular lending has a cost. And then, of course, I would suggest that he would really need to, if he need to survive and then thrive, they need to really look at possible investor or a convertible debt and that is also possible availability in the private sector.
Okay, thank you. That question was from Nalaka Ranasiga, so maybe Nalaka can perhaps get in touch with Chandra to get more further advice. I'd like to move on to another participant question. Maybe Nirmal and Talal can chip in on this. He's talking about how about job sharing and work sharing to avoid downsizing of staff. Some facets were mentioned, but maybe a more detailed answer would be useful. Job sharing and work sharing to avoid downsizing.
You need to unmute, Nirma.
Sorry. So fundamentally, what I think is we need to right size as opposed to whether we look at it as downsizing or not. And when we are looking at cost reduction initiatives, we need to look at both horizontal and vertical costs in our organization. Now, the people element of it, the most important asset in any organization, will definitely need to be re-looked into. That's where you need to have a very strong HR strategy in place. So your best performers, you need to ensure that you empower them and skill them with the necessary skills to deal with the new normal. On the other hand, you might have enough and more staff who are very passionate towards work, they're loyal, they're committed, but they may not have the necessary skills now to deal with the new normal. So what is your action plan to get them ready towards facing the new world? So that requires, again, a structured training and development plan, and some type of initiatives for maybe job rotation, job redesign, etc. And I also tend to agree with the person who has asked the question. If you feel that this person is important to the organization, it's just that that particular function or the role is having less importance, it's very difficult to find loyal people. It's very difficult to find people who understand the culture. So as a leader, that's where the leadership resilience and the decision-making resilience comes into picture. You need to have a very strong action plan on how we are going to upskill the overall knowledge and the skill base of people. Now, the good thing is, Nista, unlike those days, even through the advent of technology and other means, there are a lot of ways in which on how we can acquire new skills. Some of those, of course, needs to be implemented on the job to see how effective they are. But we need to find a mechanism, ideally, on how to look into it. The other advantage of looking at the business, both from a horizontal and vertical perspective, is that you can identify many other opportunities that you would have ignored in the past when doing things traditionally. So I think it also allows a huge amount of opportunity. The other thing I've seen in some of the countries that I've been dealing with as of late is that they are creating a pool of resources, an industry pool of resources, which can be shared within organizations so that there is some type of income coming into them. Let's say as shared resources, not outsourcing per se, but as shared resources. So there are various models in which you can look into, and that's where you need to think and act like an entrepreneur.
Yeah. So I would say that sharing skills would be a good thing, because one thing is when a pool of employees are sharing the skills of others, it makes them upskill themselves. So when it comes to a crunch time, when they're put into, like, as I said, as I spoke about, the first and most important thing in crisis management is to put together a cross-functional team. So that this will become very useful, because when the HR person knows something about the marketing side or this thing, this will become very useful and very helpful. But at the same time, you know, things have to align. Like three people would be different in how they work, what kind of skills they have. So it might take a little bit of time for everything to adjust. But as a whole, I would say the other advantage is the government of Canada is doing this. They're asking their employees, like through a certain program, to share their workload so that it reduces unemployment. So for half the budget, they can just still keep the same amount of workers, but paying them half the amount. This can reduce their income, but at the same time, when you're working 2.5 hours in a week, 2.5 days in a week, it allows the person to do something else, like with Uber, Pick Me, and B&B and all other resources in their hands. They can get into entrepreneurial work, you know, have a startup with their family, start something small, like a side hustle. So work sharing, I believe it's a promising thing in the coming future. Thanks.
Thank you. We have just 10 more minutes or so for the session to wrap up. And therefore, I'll encourage everyone to ask the question. There is one question again, maybe a follow-up. Maybe the panel can answer what would be the advice for people who are not entrepreneurs but planning to start in the near future?
Yeah, can I?
Yes.
Yeah. So I think any entrepreneur, what I would say is the idea.
The question is, they are not an entrepreneur, but they are planning to start. Getting to
So getting to entrepreneur, sometimes people think that if you have an idea, you can be an entrepreneur. Entrepreneur is a person who would understand social need or a requirement, and then commercially coming up with a solution, innovative or creative solution. And then in the process of that he takes so much of risk and then embark on it. So it's just, first of all, you need to understand the problem or the issue that he going to resolve in the commercially. So that's the most important thing. You just that's the birth of an entrepreneur, understanding a issue or a challenge or a problem in the society, on the marketplace, and then coming up with a solution commercially. So that's the beginning. I think when that happens, then you come up with an innovative idea or a creative solution, and then you try to see how that is viable in the marketplace, and that's the birth initially for that. So that's what we call the initial stage of incubation of an entrepreneur, which needs support of the hand holding through the various market mechanism and capital and all these things.
Thanks. Talal, you would like to? Yeah.
Yes. If you're not an entrepreneur and getting into entrepreneurship, I would say just you have to face up to a lot of rejection. So that is one of the first things. And if you're able to go through that, then you'll be a success. Just want to give the example. I was hearing a talk about the founder of Blackstone, one of the largest private equity firms. So he was saying that the amount of rejections at the beginning, it was like, now they run a fund which is like $500 billion, but out of 200 people, only 5 even responded, and even after that they actually rejected him. So they were talking about how they helped one of the Wall Street banks, their CEOs, when he was in major trouble. And then later, just the next day, they went and asked him for a small favor to invest like $10 million, which is nothing for them. And then the CEO was telling him, we don't do such things. And then a week later, his friend's wife was on the board with that bank. They said, these guys, this bank does exactly this. So, I mean, that's one thing you have to face as an entrepreneur. If you're getting in, you'll face a lot of rejections, but after some time, even if you fail, like you don't get approval from somebody like 100 times, maybe the 101 first time would come out successful, and you don't have to worry about the first 100 rejections. It doesn't matter. So that's my point.
Okay, thank you. Okay, I think we covered a lot of areas. I really want to thank all the panelists. I mean, I know we had a pre-discussion, but I think we went beyond the pre-discussion and we covered a lot of ground. So thank you very much. I want to wrap this session by inviting all the panelists to give. I mean, we have a multiple audience of entrepreneurs who are trying to become entrepreneurs. There are seasoned first generation, second generation entrepreneurs, as well as there are a couple of professionals in the audience who are passionate about entrepreneurship and want to support entrepreneurs. So I want to ask each of the panelists to make their closing one suggestion, one advice you would like to share it with the webinar audience, so that so after that we'll wrap it up. Maybe start from Nirmal.
Yeah, Nista. So again, I think I want to bring in some positivity here. With any pandemic, there's going to be a lot of opportunities, and the bad times are not going to continue forever. If at all we are not sure about it, we need to go back into our history to reflect on that. Having said that, I want to give a very humble message to all entrepreneurs, senior business leaders, etc. Just take a step back and think what made you successful. What made you get into the entrepreneurial journey? What was the gap or the need that you tried to fulfill, and how did you do it differently? And it's because you did things differently. It's because you challenged conventional norms and came up with creative solutions that you became an entrepreneur. You became a very successful business leader. So now is the time for you to probably think out of the box, think fresh, start planning more, and focus more on the journey as opposed to the destination. More often than not, when the time is good, we focus on what our destination is. So it's getting back into the basics, doing the simple things right, taking hard decisions, which is good for the company. If it means that you need to change your business model, if it means that you need to exit the business, it's better to do it now, because one thing that entrepreneurs should not have is ego. And if we try to start taking decisions based on ego as opposed to rational thinking, we are going to really struggle. And if every entrepreneur thought like that, as a country, we are going to really struggle to come out of it. But I have a lot of hope and I have a lot of faith in terms of our entrepreneurial community and the business community, as well as the leaders in Sri Lanka. Together, we can make it happen. It's one dream, one vision, and one reality. Best of luck.
Okay. Randula, maybe.
Yeah, sure. Thank you. And thank you, Nirma, for that note of positivity for me to pick up from. I think uncertainty with the right people, with the right attitude is possibility. And right now for entrepreneurs or for an employee, all you've really got to do is do that mind shift change within yourself to see the possibility, to see the possibilities of the constraints and to make opportunities out of it. Be a minister of possibilities. That's the best you can do for yourself, for your company, for your family, and for your staff. And it's really important that we don't reinvent the wheel, but neither do we have to follow the norm, but rather reinvent a new plethora or a path for the problem that we're trying to really solve. And whatever the uncertainties that may come to us, we are always bound to stay in our comfort zone and try to find answers in the questions themselves. And I think the answer usually lies somewhere completely different. That's why it's very important to talk to diverse amount of people as much as possible, to expand your perspectives, to expand your networks, and to expand your viewpoints on how to approach a different problem. So expand your peers, talk to different founders, talk to competitors, because you never know who can help you, and you never know who would be the next leap for your success and for the success of this country. So be open for possibilities and be open to talk to people, to embrace diverse views, to reinvent yourselves.
Chandula?
Yeah, in compared to about 2 decades ago, the ecosystem is evolving now. There is opportunity for now entrepreneurs to emerge, explore and expand. And also, I would say the ecosystem also providing that availability, accessibility, and affordability. And therefore, I think it is compared to 2 decades ago, there are not only bits and pieces here and there, but there is an evolving ecosystem to support the entrepreneurship in this country.
Thank you. Suresh, and after that, Talal. Suresh, maybe? Or Talal first?
Yeah, go first. Yeah.
Talal, you can.
Yes, yeah. Okay, sure. And I would say my 2 words would be, if you have an idea, just get on it and implement it. It's much better than becoming old and having regrets. So that's always been the driving force for me to be an entrepreneur or do the things I do. And the other thing, to leave on a positive note, I would say compare everything with the Spanish flu. I know it was totally different, but then 50 million people died that time. That was a huge percentage and affected a lot in the US. But then from 1918 to just 2 years later, Henry Ford was pushing in cars. And in the 1920s, the US New York stock market had the biggest run until it crashed in 1933. So there's nothing to keep things down. I mean, things are going to change and everything is going to come back to normal. That's my view.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Talal. Suresh?
Thank you, Nista. I think that I would be failing in my duty if I didn't talk a little bit more about Global Entrepreneurship Network, which is, I believe, the largest entrepreneurial ecosystem in the world. And we in Sri Lanka, we have partnered now with the Entrepreneur organization, which also is a large ecosystem. Now, the value of these ecosystems is that you celebrate, understand, support, and connect. Or you can do it the other way around. You connect, you understand, you support, and you celebrate. So this week with Global Entrepreneurship Week, we are celebrating entrepreneurship. And the ecosystem involves all these pillars, okay? So people who are aspiring entrepreneurs or startups or scale-ups or people who want to switch, everybody has an opportunity to go and see what is happening globally through these networks. And I think we need to use these global networks more to source information. And the Global Entrepreneurship Network Sri Lanka, which we are all members of, and we are the board. Our panelists are all our board, and we will be happy to support anyone with questions in the future. And please keep in touch with us, and we are happy to network and help you understand how to survive and succeed through this COVID pandemic. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, all the panelists, all the board directors of the Global Entrepreneurship Network Sri Lanka. I'd like to thank all the webinar participants for making it very interactive. And I'm sure we could have gone on for another hour, but everyone has their own commitments. So we will continue to engage in this style, or in the maybe when things are opened up, maybe physically as well. And there is an open invitation from Suresh to get in touch with Suresh and perhaps support or be assisted by the Gen Sri Lanka network. And I'd like to thank everyone for their time as well as insight shared. And we will continue, we'll try and meet again in another forum in the near future. So thank you very much, and have a good day.
Thank you, Nista.
Thank you, Nista. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, Nista. Thank you.